The world continues to wait for Iran's response to American strikes on its nuclear facilities. It's been less than 48 hours since Operation Midnight Hammer, which involved more than 125 aircraft, including B-2 stealth bombers, which dropped more than a dozen bunker buster bombs on Iran's Fordow and Natanz nuclear facilities. Iranian officials have vowed to respond to the strikes, and Iran's members of parliament voted to close the world's busiest oil shipping channel, the Strait of Hormuz. It's a move that could have major impacts on the global oil supply. Joining me now is the Hill's White House correspondent Alex Gangitano. Alex, why is the Strait of Hormuz so crucial for global oil trade?
Yeah, it seems like all eyes are on that now. So this strait is between Iran and Oman, and basically around 20 to 25% of global oil and gas flows through it. It's a 100-mile or so stretch, and the amount of pressures on the crude oil market and on nations as a whole, if it were to close, would really have a big impact. As you mentioned, Iran's parliament on Sunday approved of the measure to close the strait, but they would also need approval from the Supreme National Security Council. And worth noting that Iran has never actually closed the strait, despite a lot of threats for them to do so. And there's been talk about how the U.S. would be impacted. Of course, we would see prices rise here, but the most impact would be on more Asian nations like China, India, Japan, and South Korea that would be hit the hardest by a closure like this.
Alex, if Iran's supreme leader authorized the closure of the strait, how much of an economic impact would it have on Iran's neighboring countries?
Right. So those neighbors, rely on this strait for transit and for, of course, oil getting to other parts of the world. I think one of the main focuses now is actually on the impact of what China could do in terms of helping out neighbors, helping out the rest of the world because they rely so much on this strait and for oil to get to them eventually through it. We actually heard that Secretary of State Marco Rubio was calling on China, saying, we know Beijing needs this to remain open. So maybe they could help out in convincing Iran against doing this, and that would help out the other neighboring nations.
President Trump posted on Truth Social earlier today calling for everyone to keep oil prices down, and the U.S. has asked China to stop Iran from closing the strait. Has China responded to that request, and what type of diplomatic relationship do the two countries have?
Yeah, it's interesting. At this point, there's a lot of talks between intermediaries, China being one of them, and Rubio, of course, trying to see if China could get involved in helping to convince Iran to not close the strait. That would just be one of the many intermediaries. Iran and China rely on each other for, these oil markets so they can have that interaction. Of course, the US and China has an interesting relationship in terms of talks. The trade agreement was just able to be finalized a couple weeks ago that brought down our tariff rate on them to 55%. And the president has said that we have a relationship with them and are able to communicate well with China. If they'll actually listen to our calls for them to step in at Iran, though, is the big question of, if they're able to, or if they can be convinced by the US to try to get involved.
The U.S. involvement in the conflict between Israel and Iran has set off Trump ally Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene in a lengthy post on X. Greene saying, in part, foreign wars, regime change, and world peace is what people voted for. Going on to write, it feels like a complete bait and switch, calling Trump not a king. How much divide are we seeing in the Republican Party over the strikes?
Yeah, it's really fascinating, particularly a divide in the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. Of course, one of the main pillars, as Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene mentioned, that Trump ran on is this isolationist America First theory. And that's a lot of him promising to either get us out of global conflicts on day one, that included Ukraine and Russia as the war rages on months in, and to keep us out of global conflicts. That involves situations like this. So a lot of those MAGA voters who took his, America First agenda to heart, and that's one of the main reasons why they wanted to throw their support behind Trump, are feeling kind of disillusioned today and curious of why he felt the need to go into another conflict zone and get the U.S. involved with what Israel and whoever else is doing abroad. We'll have to see if that impacts support going forward, or if some of these supporters can be talked down about how upset they were. I mean that X post from the Congresswoman was pretty harsh, but I've talked to some folks in more MAGA world who have said that if the president explains himself about why he chose to go in and how it's in the U.S. best interest, that they're hopeful that people will come around. But she seemed to have some pretty harsh words to say.
What kind of military response could we see from the U.S. if Iran follows through on its threat?
Yeah, it's interesting that seems like something that the U.S. is trying to just figure out ways to talk around having to threaten anything in terms of a military response because of what the implications of all of that is. So they're going towards deal making, getting back to the table to talk with Iran about the nuclear talks now. We have heard Vice President Vance say that there's no plans, for boots on the ground, that would be a situation that they don't want to find themselves in. And of course, there's the pressure from Trump supporters and the MAGA wing of the Republican Party, who boots on the ground would be a red line. So the president is definitely hearing all those pressures.
A rapidly developing story. Alex Ganchitano, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.